stick nuts and bolts together all day long, you know, and go home. And I had ran into several different organizations in the matter of those 3 years before I met Jim Jones and Peoples Temple.
How would you describe your state of mind during that period?
Searching, more than anything, searching.
Searching for
something to put my energies into I felt was worthwhile, that I could commit my life to.
And then what happened?
Well, I heard about Jim Jones and Peoples Temple from a woman I knew in Nevada, and I went to a meeting, and I liked what I saw, especially the integration. I had never seen so much genuine camaraderie between black and white people before, and the congregation was a very homogeneous one from all backgrounds and ethnic backgrounds, religious backgrounds, and so on. And I liked what Jim Jones had to say. So within a matter of 2 weeks after the first meeting I had gone to, I was asked if I wanted to move to Redwood Valley and work with the church, and I said, yeah, so I did.
Now, speaking just selfishly, what did you get out of this? What kind of feelings did you get out of this that caused you to feel like the People's Temple was an answer?
Well, I felt like I was helping poor people to a certain extent. I was doing something worthwhile and not just wandering. So, Bill, I'd be getting pretty disgusted with myself, you know. And I think that was it. Plus this, I guess, a feeling of belonging to something, you know, was important. Feeling that you were having a cause to work for. All those kinds of things enter into it, you know.
You had been disgusted with yourself, you say?
Yeah, because I was wandering, you know. I was 4 years old and hadn't settled down, and I wasn't happy with my life at the time. I wanted to do something constructive. What I was doing was not constructive. I wasn't contributing anything to society, really.
Would you say that it was a kind of a feeling of not belonging?
Not so much not belonging, but just not doing something constructive with my life.
And then when you found the People's Temple, how did these feelings change?
Well, like I said, it had a lot of human service programs.
No, I don't mean what the programs were or what you did. I mean, how did your own feelings change?
Well, like I said, I thought I was doing something worthwhile. I was working, I was doing something constructive, and I was doing something that fulfilled me because I felt like I was helping people. It was actually pretty simple. It's not that complicated.
How important was the camaraderie, the feeling of belonging, the feeling of being a part of something, would you say?
It was important. I can't say how important. I guess it provides a feeling of security more than anything. I knew that if I'd encounter any medical bills or dental bills or whatever it might be, that I'd be taken care of. So I guess in that sense it provides a feeling of security. Plus a lot of people that you have a common interest with. You know. But I don't know if that was the most important thing or not. I think it's a very complex, it's a very complex thing, psychologically and everything else. For everybody, because everybody has their own story, everybody came to the temple for different reasons and so on.
Well, it is complex, but you are sorting it out rather well. Security, and what other things would you list?
Well, security, like I said, doing something constructive, having a purpose to work for and feel, knowing that was worthwhile. I think that's it pretty much.
And how important was it that you had a man like Jim Jones in a leadership position in this organization?
Well, he was the organization. I mean, he was the organization more than anything, and he was a father figure to people, including myself. So he fulfilled that aspect. Very charismatic man, very dynamic speaker, and so he fulfilled all those, you know, he fulfilled a father role to people.
Why did you want a father figure?
Well, I was never that close with my father. And I guess different people have, I mean, everybody has their own background, their own story. I never got along that well with my dad. Always been very, very kind through this whole entire thing. Very understanding and very loving, which I appreciate very much. So I think I've probably been looking for a father figure most of my life. And my mom died when I was 15, so.
And so Jim Jones
Became a father figure.
and filled a void you had felt all your life.
Right. See, when I met Jim Jones, I wasn't thinking of that. When I was in the temple and looking back on it, I can analyze it. When I came to People's Temple, I wasn't thinking, I want a father. You know, it wasn't that kind of thing. But all those things enter into it.
It was sort of subconscious.
Yeah. I mean, as I was in the temple, I realized that he fulfilled that role. But he fulfilled that role for everybody. I mean, they called him father. Everybody called him father.
How important was it that Jim Jones made the decisions? I gather that one pretty much in the People's Temple, as in many other organizations, religious organizations, surrendered one's own decision-making to a large measure to Jim Jones.
Mm-hmm. Looking back on it, I can see how that was important. You see, I have to reanalyze my whole life now and reanalyze why I stayed in People's Temple, who Jim Jones was, what Jim Jones was, why I didn't get out of the organization before I did. So a lot of these questions are good questions, but I'm still sorting things out in my own mind. You know? I think that was probably an important aspect, you know, knowing, I mean, you did have decisions made for you in a certain degree, so that was removed from your life. I mean, part of that responsibility was taken away.
How did you feel about that?
At the time, I never thought about it. I mean, it didn't necessarily mean anything, because you don't think of yourself as being controlled or having your life guided for you, you know what I'm saying? So I never really thought about it much.
Was that part of the attraction of the People's Temple, that here you felt you had found a father figure to whom you could surrender decision-making and trust him to make decisions for your life?
Yeah.
Was that a part of it?
I didn't consider it a part of it until this whole nightmare happened. You know, the word mind control is used a lot, and the word brainwashing is used a lot, and so on, which I frankly thought was a lot of bunk. But looking back, I can see that was exactly what was happening. You know, exactly what was happening. I had not considered that as part of any psychological or emotional reasons why I was there.
We've noticed that a number of the people who are survivors, some of them have a kind of a blank stare, as if they're drugged. What do you know about that?
Well, I think you have to consider what they've been through in the last 2 weeks. I mean, I saw my wife and my son die in front of my eyes. I don't know if my eyes look blank or not, but watching your entire life disintegrate in front of your eyes isn't something that people go through every day. And 914 dead bodies is something the world has gone through every day. And I know that blank stare thing is something that's used a lot in reference to the Moonies and so on and so forth, but as for me, I'm in a state of shock. And
Well,
I think,
you don't have a blank stare.
well,
but other people have looked kind of drugged. I mean, how? And you know, of course, it's now become clear that there was a lot of Thorazine and Valium and other heavy sedatives and tranquilizers in the People's Temple here in Guyana. Why were all those drugs here?
I don't know. I was not in Jonestown that much. We had a medical department. I really can't say. I mean, I'm learning, believe it or not, I'm learning a lot more about what went on in Jonestown since this happened than I actually knew what was going on in Jonestown before it happened.
You lived in Jonestown as a part of the People's Temple here in Guyana for how long?
Only about 3 months. I lived in Georgetown most of the time.
And during this 3 months, were people drugged that you had knowledge of?
No,
Drugs put into the food,
not that I had knowledge of, no.
into drink, anything like that?
It's been very hard to do the kind of work. I mean, farming is hard work, no matter what, whether you're farming in the United States or you're farming anywhere. It'd be very hard to farm and be drugged at the same time.
I mean,
Yeah, this is Mike Carter over here, and we're moving the camera over so we can see him.
Okay, the pharmacy, you would not even, the standard drugs that you would have to take, you know, for whatever, if you're diabetic or whatever, you don't even keep in your own possession. You're handed out from the pharmacy, three times a day.
People don't even keep aspirin.
So, I mean, as myself, I had no idea how many drugs were there or anything like that because they're always handed out. So I had no idea the volume.
One thing it's
of any of this.
important to remember.
When I went back to identify bodies, all the babies I had seen, you know, were next to the mothers, some next to their fathers. All of them had poison, so I would imagine that the parents had taken them. By force or willingly, I'm not sure.
You believe that your wife poisoned your daughter?
Well, I believe she was holding her. I don't know if she willingly did it. That's what I'm saying. I know that, I mean, it's obvious to me she had her arms around her. I mean, when I went back to find her.
Knowing Jonestown, as you did, knowing your family, why would your wife have done that?
I don't think she had a choice. I don't think anybody there had a choice on whether they lived or died. They had to do what was the will of Jim Jones.
Why didn't they have a choice?
Well, he, I'm speaking of Jones now, had the voice. I mean, he made the decisions on what to do, and obviously he thought that this was the end of People's Temple for some reason or another. Even though obviously before all, even with the people who were leaving, Congressman Ryan still thought it was a success and thought that Jonestown was a, you know, and it actually was. I mean, it had a lot of problems.
What I'm coming to is, if Jim Jones stood up and said, let's everybody commit suicide and let's kill all the children, would your wife have poisoned your child because Jim Jones said so?
That's a hard question. I think she might have.
Why?
Because there was nothing else in life she had. Especially when we were like us, who had grown up in the temple from, you know, being a teenager. You don't have anything else in life but what you've been taught in People's Temple, what you've been given. You're dependent on it. And you believed whatever, you know, he would tell you was the truth because you'd heard nothing else. And I believe a lot of people thought the same way. There was nothing else in life if you didn't have Jim Jones and People's Temple. And if that was going to fall apart, you might as well die.
You believe that?
I would say maybe up to maybe Friday or Saturday I did. But I was, you know, it's foolish because it's ridiculous. No, I'm not now, not at all.
You were in Jonestown. You escaped the suicides because you were in a corner of the village too far away to know that everybody else was committing suicide.
Well, I didn't know that didn't know it had started, although we were allowed out to take a package somewhere. We didn't know that the suicides were starting until after we had left and my brother had told me.
It's totally by chance. I mean,
And
totally by chance.
still to this day, don't know why we were picked.
If you had been closer to the central area when Jim Jones said, now it's time for all of us to die, would you have poisoned yourself?
I don't think so. I think they would have had to fight me.
And yet your wife did, and so far as you know, poisoned your child.
Yes. I think from the judge of things, I think at first, from what I've heard, there were some people who didn't want to, and there was one woman I've heard who stood up and they all shouted her down. And so a lot of people at the first part thought, well, it's going to be an easy death, but she said it would be, before. It'd be an easy death, no pain, and we'd all meet somewhere and, God knows where. And here now, I heard that I think at first a lot of people would have done it willingly, no problem at all. But I think as things would go on, a lot more people would not want to, and a lot of people, would hold back from doing it. You see what I'm saying? As things gone on, people saw the horror of it. People would less want to listen to Jones and think more for their own mind.
You are how old?
I'm 20.
And you had been a part of People's Temple for how long?
A little, just over 5 years.
And you lived here in Guyana at Jonestown and in Georgetown for how long?
14 months in Guyana, 9 of which were in Jonestown, 5 in Georgetown.
Let me ask you the question I asked Tim a minute ago. What was there a need in your life that People's Temple met?
A lot of them. I mean, I had no mother, essentially, during most of my childhood. And just my dad, he's in his older years, and, I was young. No fault of his, of course, but so I essentially needed some parenthood or a father and mother figure. I needed a lot more companionship, as I didn't have a lot of friends, especially after moving to a new city. Didn't really have a lot of friends, although I had some.
So
that was fulfilled almost very quickly when I came down.
What was fulfilled quickly? Tell me that again.
Friendship, a lot of people who immediately were warm to me, which I had never felt before. It was really, and that's one thing really attracted me. That so many people were so warm to me so quickly.
Why do you think they were so warm so quickly?
Well, I mean, at that point, I think people were in People's Temple, or at that point, a lot closer to each other, and they were happy to see people join People's Temple. It was, you were taught at that time to be friends with everyone, to love everyone, type of a thing. And people believed it, and I believed it.
All right, I want to ask, once I get this running, if we ever do, did you believe, Don, would you pour the guys some coffee? Tim wanted some, and you've got it over there, and, all right, say what?
Anytime.
Mike, did you believe that Jim Jones was God?
Well, I believed he had some sort of power.
The truck went by and blocked out your answer. Did you believe that Jim Jones was God?
I believe he had some sort of a power. It seemed impossible to fake all the stuff he was doing, in the temple up there. But God, not really.
You thought he was somehow divine?
Yeah, I believe he had some sort of, he just the way he had spoke, and the way he presented himself. It seemed that way.
That he was somehow in touch with God?
I don't know, in touch. I mean, as far as a religious aspect, he was not religious. I mean, he spoke, some verses from the Bible and so forth, but anybody who knows anything about Jim Jones, he was not a religious person.
What was he?
He was an atheist, although he believed, there was Jesus and everything, but he believed more of equalitarian type of a living.
He was more interested in socialism, Marxism?
More so, as we got down here more, it was more into the Marxist-Leninists, especially down here in Guyana. We would just call it equalitarianism and socialism in the States.
He told you that he didn't believe in God?
And a divine God that, you know, he said, how can there be a God with
Anthropomorphic God.
you know, a God who loved all and loved everything, yet there's starving babies throughout the world and suffering throughout the world. How could there be a loving God?
Jim Jones told you he did not believe in God.
Yeah, and a loving God, that's right.
He said he didn't believe there was a loving God.
That's right.
He didn't believe there was a God figure, a thinking, conscious entity.
Yeah, that's correct.
Did that strike you as strange for Reverend Jim Jones to say?
Well, as you got to know Peoples Temple, not really. As you know, Peoples Temple is just not an ordinary group. And it's obvious even more so now. Yeah, I mean, you pretty quickly got to know this, you know, that. And I mean, in a way, it made sense. The way he would portray it as, at least it made sense to me at the time, of course.
How did Jim Jones say this? Was he speaking from a platform, or was he talking to you?
No, he was speaking from a platform. He said it publicly.
Jim,
Anybody who's been in any service of People's Temple has heard that.
and
It's not a deep, dark secret.
No. Anybody at any time practically who's been in any meeting of People's Temple would know that.
well, then why did you? If Jim Jones himself said that he didn't believe in God, as most people understand God, a thinking entity, what was it that made you think that he had divine contact, since he himself disputed any sort of divine entity?
I mean, contact with God?
Yeah.
Well, he never claimed he had, I don't know, maybe he did claim, I don't know, but he, just he seemed to know a lot about what, you know, he would say things would happen, a lot of times they would happen. I don't know if that was all rigged or what. There's just some things that, about him, that obviously I'm sorry, it's very hard to, it's been a long time.
All right. Let me ask you, Tim, your wife, over on Tim. Did your wife murder your child?
I don't know. I know the first thought that came into my mind was when I saw my baby dead in her arms was they've murdered my son. Not that she had murdered my son. I think what I thought was Jim Jones had murdered my son.
A mother's first instinct, ordinarily,
To protect the child.
and yet, from what evidence we have, there's reason to believe that your wife poisoned your child.
True.
Why would she have done that?
I don't think she had any choice. It's a good question. I mean, it's a question I'll probably ask myself for the rest of my life. Along with why didn't I get my wife and my son out of there sooner? And that's guilt I have to live with for the rest of my life. From, I don't know. I just don't know.
Would your wife have poisoned your child because Jim Jones said so?
I can't believe that. Because I know how she felt about her son. I can't believe that. I know that when I saw her kneeling on the ground, there was tears going down her cheeks. And she was obviously in pain and grieving. I leaned over and I started crying, and I said, I love you so much, I love you, I love you. And she started going into convulsions. I wasn't, all I was thinking about at that point was, I mean, I had nothing else to live for. I mean, my son was dead, and my wife was dying, and I had a way out of Jonestown, and I took it. I mean, why I was picked, I don't know.
Can you explain picked?
Well, like I said, Maria, I was walking down the path by the pavilion, and Maria Katsura saw me, and it was like she just said, come here, I want to talk to you. It wasn't like she was looking for me. I think it was just absolutely, totally, just, I don't know if you call it luck or...
This is before the suicide ritual began. And so she said what to you?
She called my brother and I into the room next to the radio room and said, folks that have a heavy suitcase to carry, would we help them carry it? And I said yes. I never conceived, the entire time I was in Peoples Temple, that Jim Jones would be mad enough to do anything like this, because he asked me several months ago when I was in Jonestown for a short period of time. He asked me a rhetorical question. He said, you know how we just don't all die tomorrow? And there was no crisis going on or anything like that. Like I said, it was a rhetorical question. And I said, no. And he said, because I do not have the moral right to take these babies' lives, these seniors' lives, these people's lives. We came 7,000 miles to live, not to die. And I believed him. I took him at his word.
Why Guyana?
I think there was a number of reasons. One, he had been in Guyana apparently 17 years ago. He liked the people. It was a third world country, black country, and the congregation was predominantly black. It was a government who was trying to start a socialist society. He had a socialist cooperative, and I'm not sure of all the elements that were involved, but I think those were...
Going back to the money, Maria Katsaris, I think you said, asked you to come in and get this suitcase, and she said what?
Like I said, when she asked this question, she just asked us if we would help folks deliver a heavy suitcase. She didn't say where or anything else. And I said, yeah, primarily because I just wanted to, I think, get out of Jonestown at that time. Like, if I had been thinking my wife and my son are going to die in the next 5 minutes, I'd have been thinking something entirely different. I've been thinking how to get them out. And
you wanted out of Jonestown, why?
Just the whole atmosphere that day was, I can't describe it. It was like the place was disintegrating, literally disintegrating. It was a very eerie, scary sort of feeling all day long. It was just very, between the, I mean, the people leaving and families being broken up, because some of the families, part of the families stayed back, some would go. There was a lot of crying, there was a lot of heavy emotion. One man was ready to leave and take his 3 kids, not even tell his wife. His wife didn't even know that he was leaving. And a very
So you mean you wanted
strange,
to, you wanted to get out for the, you mean to go up to Georgetown or something, for an hour or
just
a week
whatever.
or a
I
day?
mean, she said, do you want to go? And I said, yeah, I want to go. But like I said,
You didn't mean get away forever, you just meant
No,
leave for the time being because it was a bad scene that day.
No, if I wanted to get away from ever, I did.
So
certainly had the
there was
chances
this
to do
suitcase, and then what happened?
Well, you got to take things in sequence. She asked me to get my suit. She asked me if I had a suitcase. I said, yeah. She said, well, you better change your clothes, because I had not some heavy shoes on, just a t-shirt. So I went back to the cottage area, and I changed my clothes and got my suitcase, and we went to West House. And I gave the suitcase to a woman named Carolyn Layton. I didn't go into the house. And her sister, Annie Moore, who was one of Jones's nurses, was coming up on the porch there in front of the house and asked me to go find Maria and ask whether or not 2 of the children that were there should come to the pavilion or whether they should stay down there. So on the way, I met Maria actually about halfway towards the pavilion, and I heard the word suicide. I didn't hear the context, but I became, at that point, I got a feeling of I don't know, I can't describe the emotions. Terror, dread, like, oh my God, this couldn't be happening, or what I'm afraid might be happening, it can't be happening. And I went back, started back down towards West House, and I met Annie and told her that Maria had said, keep the children down there for now. And I knew we'd need some water, but I don't know, I think I was being drawn towards Pavilion because I wanted to see what was happening. When I got in the kitchen area, I heard a lot of screaming and crying and a lot of going on. So at that point, that's when I thought about my wife and my son. I wanted to see, what was happening.
So you went out, you saw your child dead, you saw your wife dying, you spoke to her, and then
She didn't answer me.
How were you able to flee at that point with this suitcase?
Well, like I said, we've been asked to do something, so apparently, like I said, we had a way out. So I did not see any armed guards, but apparently there were armed guards. I guess, they had been told to let us go. I guess it was just entirely something by chance.
So you left with this suitcase, and with who else?
My brother and Mike Probst.
And you didn't know what was in the suitcase?
Well, when I got back, see, while I was witnessing this nightmare, because I just didn't see my wife and my son. I mean, I saw other mothers kneeling, holding their babies and crying, and I saw some bodies on the ground, and it was just a nightmare. I can't describe it. It was a nightmare. When I got back, the suitcase had been filled with money, and I don't know if I guess she told Maria had told Probst to take it to the embassy. He said he doesn't remember if she said Soviet embassy or not. Just take it to the embassy.
Why would Jones have wanted to take this money to the Soviet embassy?
That's a good question. I honestly do not know.
Had the Soviet embassy supplied the money?
I don't know. Probst and him were given guns. We were told to kill ourselves if we got caught.
Pistols. And just to make sure we didn't do anything, just in case we happen to run into somebody and they start going out, it heard that we saw that we dropped the suitcase or something.
How did you two guys link up anyway?
Through Maria.
She got...
When I came back down to West House, he was there. And Probst was already
Oh,
there.
I see.
Yeah. And so then what was this about guns?
We had, Maria had given me and Probst guns to kill ourselves if we were caught. And, at that point I thought, woman, you're crazy if you think I'm going to kill myself,
You gave him to me.
So,
We're rolling, Justin. Go ahead.
so I went, I think almost the first place we stopped, to bury the money. I had taken, it had 5 rounds.
Why did you stop to bury money?
The suitcase
Because it
was
was
heavy.
getting too heavy.
At that point, we were running for our lives. We were trying to get out of it.
You see, it had just rained.
See, I told them after we got back down and we'd left, I said, people starting to die back there. And apparently, Maria had told Probst they'd gone after the truck to get Ryan. And so, I mean, we knew that somebody was on the loose. People's Temple members were on the loose. And also, it was a matter of survival at that point.
So you did what?
I said it was a matter of survival at that point.
So you did what?
So we ran, like I said, with the suitcase. It was heavy. It was awkward. We tried to unload some of the money to make it lighter. It's not easy running through the mud with the suitcase and everything else at the same time when you're trying to run for your life. And when we got to the piggery, we dumped the rest of the money and then went to Port Kaituma. And we kept some money on us, and they had kept the guns for 2 reasons. One, the guns, in case we ran into any People's Temple members who were trying to shoot people up, to defend ourselves, and the money in case we ran into any Guyanese or somebody along the way who would try to impair our progress to try to buy them off, just so we could get to safety.
Somebody thought that People's Temple members might try to shoot you?
Well, we had heard that, these guys had gone after Ryan. So we didn't know what to think,
What did you hear about that?
You'd have to ask Probst, I don't know.
Just what Mike had told us that, they had gone after Ryan,
Do you have any way of knowing whether or not Jones directed them to do that?
I have no idea, but
I don't know. I can't believe they did it on their own, but I don't know. I mean, That's a question. That's a good question.
How many people was it who went after Ryan?
I don't know. I mean, I read in newspaper accounts there was 6 or 7, but I don't know.
Do you know who the people were who went after Ryan?
Just what I read in the newspapers, and that's all.
When you first came here to this hotel, many of the survivors from Jonestown were afraid of you.
Right. We were afraid of them.
They said you were a part of Jones' inner group.
Not true.
You'd been given guns by Jones' inner group.
Yeah, right, to kill ourselves if we were caught. Those were the instructions. I mean, it was, I mean, that's all been resolved. We understood their paranoia, and I don't think they understood. They didn't know the circumstances surrounding our leaving. And, I mean, it was understandable reaction, I think, on their part. And I think they finally realized that we were as afraid of them as they were of us.
Why were you afraid of them?
Well, for any number of reasons, because we have been considered in leadership. We represented Jim Jones to them. Mainly because there was 20 of them, you know. One of them came up and said, I can't guarantee that one of these people won't try to strangle you in the middle of the night. I mean, there's only 3 of us, there's 20 of them, right? So, I mean, that's another reason. And we didn't want any trouble at all. Like I said, we wanted just to survive. And they were saying a lot of outrageous things at the time, but I mean, that's been worked out. I think it was just a trauma. I mean, everybody went through a trauma, and it was a sudden, I think we were thrown together totally. We asked first not to come to this hotel because they were here, and we knew that they were paranoid of us, and we didn't want to upset them. Well, they brought us here anyway. Then we asked when we got to the desk, do not take us on the same floor where they are, please, because we don't want to upset them. So not only did they take us to the same floor, they took us right into their bedroom, which immediately caused, you know, a panic reaction on their part. And it was just a matter of talking things out. But that conflict has been resolved. I mean, there's no tension, and we're all talking with each other. You know.
Do you intend to harm anyone?
I do not intend to harm anyone. I mean, I was in Vietnam. I did not believe in violence.
Do you have any knowledge of a plan for Peoples Temple survivors to harm other people?
No, I think that's just a lot of bunk. I mean, I think Jones used to talk a lot of that, I think, to keep fear in people's hearts, you know. But I can say I'm as afraid for my life right now, I think, as anybody is.
It's a way of keeping people in the temple. You know, the fear that if you left, you would have this great hit squad going after you or whatever, you know. But I think he used paranoia. I mean, it showed here when we saw each other that, afternoon. We were both paranoid of each other, thinking, they thought we were going after them, and we thought, since we represented that they would go after us. And I'm so afraid, in the States, maybe there really is. I agree with Tim. I think it was just a thing he had, because he didn't trust people at all.
He didn't trust anybody. He said that. Nope, he didn't trust anybody.
What kind of an organization did you think you were a part of, living here in Guyana, working for a man who said, if you ever want out, I've got a hit squad that'll kill you?
Well, one thing I didn't believe a lot of what Jim Jones said.
What did you think about the fact that here's this man who's invited you to come to Guyana and live and build a better world, and he says, and if you decide you don't like it here anymore, I'll see to it that you're assassinated when you leave. Now, what did you think about that?
Like I said, I thought it was a lot of bunk. I thought it was an intimidation.
But why would this man be intimidating you, and why would you continue to participate in a community, the leader of whom is trying to intimidate you?
See, that's a very complex question. I mean, it's a good question. It's a rational question. But like I said, there's a lot of things that enter into it. You talk about mind control. You talk about, I was here because my wife and son were here. And I was not just going to abandon my son.
Why couldn't you just all get up and leave and say, hey, this guy is talking about assassinating us if we want to leave? I don't...
Well, see, he kept families apart. Like I said, I wasn't going to leave without my wife or my son. When I was in Georgetown, my wife and son were never here. So it was he divided and conquered. He deliberately kept families apart from each other just so that kind of thing wouldn't happen.
There were strange forms of brutality used against children who had misbehaved. We understand they were tied up, left in the jungle, that they were dropped down into wells until they screamed that they would be good and not do whatever it was that they had done that Jim Jones didn't like. And parents stood by and let this kind of thing be done to their children.
That's true. Like I said, your questions are rational, but you're talking about an irrational situation, and the word mind control is not just...
Well, what was going on in your mind as you
I didn't
witnessed...
believe it. You know, what I actually thought was, I knew in San Francisco that what they would do sometimes is take a child off into a room and say, all right, when you go out, scream and yell and everything else for effect, you know. And I honestly, that's what I thought was being done. I thought that they were taking these children away and they were coming back screaming and yelling, but they had told them to do that for effect on, you know, for the other children.
Well,
I didn't honestly believe that kind of brutality. And
didn't this all sound kind of freaky to you?
sound freaky?
Yeah, I mean, here you are.
Well, I told you what was
putting yourself and your family into an organization in which people are encouraged to deceive other members of the group for whatever effect, that he was taking them off and pretending to torture them and bringing them back so they would scream and make other people think they had been tortured if they hadn't.
You got to remember, you're not thinking irrationally. Your mind has been controlled. You've been. Say it's a very complex question.
You made to believe that that's the right thing to do. You may, you know,
I mean, you have to talk to. There's a psychiatrist here who's a specialist in cults, and he can answer your question better.
Well, wait,
than
what was
we
Mike
could.
going to say?
I'm just saying you're made to believe that that's the right way to do. You know, you're made to believe that that's the right type of discipline for the children. I mean, there were some kids who were, I mean, obviously problem children, you know, from, you know, their backgrounds, whatever they were, and just wouldn't obey the rules of, you know,
I mean,
staying to...
All these, you say, isn't that sort of freaky behavior, but child beating is one of the biggest crimes in the United States right now. You know, and what goes on in prisons in the United States.
Yeah, but you didn't beat your child.
No, I didn't beat my child. I never spanked my child.
But you were willing to let Jim Jones beat your child.
Well, I don't know. That situation never arose. My son was only 15 months old.
But you were willing to let Jim Jones beat other children.
One thing is that since May, all physical violence had stopped. There was no more beatings. There was no more that sort of thing. Well, he can tell you he was there.
Why did you continue to participate in a community in which child beating and psychological torture, if you will, were
Can you
all...
please, I mean, one thing you need to understand, all this time, that was her whole life. I've seen exaggerations in this week's Newsweek on some of the things that did happen. I mean, some things did happen, but like I said,
What did happen that you saw? What did you see happen?
The last beating I had seen, or you know what you say, is a guy who had molested children of 12 years under, and he was, I mean, and one of those children...
That particular person had a history of molesting children, and he had been talked to, he had been given psychiatric counseling, he had been... I wasn't there when it happened, but I mean, that was the last resort.
From what we've read, those of you who were living in Jonestown would assemble in a group and you would see people be punished. Supposedly one woman who had sex with somebody she wasn't supposed to was forced to have sex with somebody else.
Can I say that is a lie? Because, I mean, maybe it would happen when I was in Georgetown, but I never saw that.
What did you see? What kinds of things?
Like I said, I'm telling you now about that one guy who was molesting children, and he had a history of doing it. And then what happened is that child had molested even a younger child. One of the 12 or 11-year-olds had molested a younger child. As a matter of fact, one of my cousins. And, you know, a couple of guys had got really upset and went up and hit him. You know, and then a couple more people hit him. And he was just giving all these excuses why, you know, he had no way to control himself and things like that. And it wasn't like every single person who were brought up, you know, for whatever things they had done wrong were beat. You know, I think some people
Did
are
you
getting
see
this
people who were small forced to box people who were big? We've heard about
in
that.
San Francisco. And that happened in San Francisco, yeah.
What did you think about that?
I thought it was a way of disciplining, but,
Yeah.
but parents signed legal consent forms before any of that happened. Even some people who were out of the organization now, have been out for a long time, signed consent forms. Like you're talking about something, you're asking rational questions, and you're talking about an irrational situation.
What was in your mind at the time is what I want to know.
I thought it was a form of structure that was necessary.
Beating.
You say beating. Have you ever spanked your child?
I don't have a child.
You don't have a child. Well, I got spanked when I was a son.
We're
I
not
would
talking-
like to ask any
We're
parent.
not
I'd like to
talking
know.
about spanking. We're talking about
You
a
are talking
man.
Yes,
about
you are.
spanking. You're
That's
talking
what
about
happened.
spanking. You're talking about spanking. But when it comes out in the media, and say, I don't want to be put in the role of trying to defend this because I don't agree with it. But still, you know, you're asking a question that's trying to put us on the spot. But when you're talking about the spanking, children spank their parents. Child beating is one of the worst crimes that's going on in the United States. I'm not just in the United States, but I mean all over the world. But it manifests itself a lot in the United
You
States.
saw, in San Francisco, you saw people who had violated some rule or other of Jim Jones put into a boxing ring and forced to box somebody that they had no chance against.
Well,
They were in effect beaten up by this other guy. And you saw that. And you
I
thought,
saw that, and so did several thousand other people.
And you thought that was okay.
I thought it was maybe it might change the person because the person was so hard-headed to, you know, just, I mean, usually, I mean, I don't know, it went different times, different things would happen. But you know, it was a way to, at that time, the way I thought was just a way to maybe structure the person because nothing else went through their head, so maybe that would go through their head.
And what had this person done that this was an appropriate punishment?
Violence of some sort.
One
the
person
one
had
I
stolen
remember.
something once from a store.
So in the People's Temple, whatever punishment Jim Jones decided was appropriate to the crime, you thought was okay.
You didn't argue with the leader.
So if Jim Jones wanted to beat somebody up,
I mean, if you had an argument with the leader, then you took your argument to him, but you never argued publicly. I had a lot of complaints and hostilities and arguments that I took to him.
you watched Jim Jones supervising the beating of children, the beating of people, the dropping of children into wells and forced to scream.
I never saw any children.
Never saw
dropping
that
into
either.
a well.
You didn't see that.
No.
Like I told you what I thought was happening.
Yeah, oh, that's right. I'm sorry, you did. But you thought all of these were appropriate if Jones felt that this was the way to achieve whatever he wanted, and if it would work, that was the only thing that mattered to you. Would the punishment accomplish the purpose?
Generally, yes.
Can I just ask a question? I mean, one thing that he would, especially in the States, would say a lot. I mean, which would you rather have? You know, this organization disciplining your children, or juvenile hall?
So any discipline that Jim Jones decided was good for your child was okay with you?
Well, my child wasn't quite old enough to be disciplined. I mean, at being a baby. But
We understand some babies were spanked.
I've never seen it. I mean, I don't know what you consider baby. I've never seen it.
You know, you say something like this. I don't want to be in a position of defending Jim Jones or that, but I mean, you ask a misleading question. They understand some babies were spanked. I don't know any parent in America has spanked their child at one time. I mean, if your child
Child that's a few months old.
No. I never saw any child a few months old spanked. Never.
So the only discipline you saw and that you had firsthand knowledge of was the beating in San Francisco of someone who had stolen something.
Yeah, and public confrontation. I mean, the thing that was used most was humiliation, not beatings. It was public humiliation.
Like what?
Well, you get brought up in front of the entire congregation for whatever it is that you might have done. Why did you do this? It was a peer pressure sort of thing. It's a thing that's used in most. Well, I know it's used in China. I've never been to China, but from what I've read, it's used in China, where a person is humiliated in front of the community, and because of that, it's a peer pressure. sort of thing. It's called group catharsis, group therapy.
I understand that women used to stand up and talk about having had sex with Jim Jones and how great it was.
Mm-hmm.
You saw that?
Mm-hmm.
You were in the audience?
Yeah.
And women stood up?
Well, most of it was done at least in the States. I never saw it here in Guyana, but I wasn't in Jonestown that much. In the States, most of it was done in a group called the Planning Commission, which was a group of about 120 people who made most of the business decisions for the organization. See, Jones emasculated. He had to maintain the image of the leader. The leader had to be the great lover, the best lover, you know. And for the most part, those people were told what to say. You know, I mean, I don't have any first-hand knowledge of what he was like because I never went to bed with the man. But it was all part of a show. It was all part of a stage.
Well, what did you think when you were a part of a group and you're all around and women are standing up and saying, I had sex with Jim Jones and it was the best sex I ever had, and did you think that this was the way to run an organization?
Well, I understood from the point that a leader has to see, there's always competition between males, you know, and that's one way of emasculating the males.
If it made Jim Jones, if it made Jim Jones look bigger, it was okay with you?
Yeah, I thought that the image of the leader should be maintained. Whether or not I believed it, you know, was irrelevant.
Whether or not you believed the sex had really taken place. You thought
or whether or not it was all that, you know, good.
You thought it was a good thing that this sort of thing was being perpetrated.
Can I just say one thing before we go any further? I mean, you must understand that's what we did believe. We're telling you what we were thinking then, okay? So I don't want it used against us because, you know, obviously we were fools to stay in that organization. I'm realizing more. I was a fool. And I hope none of this is going to be held against us. I mean, I'm sure it will follow us the rest of our lives.
It will be. Don't worry,
you know.
It will be.
But I mean, Christ, we're going to have to start a change somewhere. And unfortunately, you had to start now. But that's, you know, that's just unfortunately the way it goes.
What would you like to add? Anything that I've asked you that you think is important?
There's so much to the story of Peoples Temple. I mean, it's as much of a dream as a nightmare in some sense, you know.
I think what happened was monstrous. It was a horror. I don't think there's any words in the English language to describe the crime that took place in Jonestown, and I'll have guilt for the rest of my life that I didn't do something to stop it. When maybe I could have.
And yet, as you try now to understand the way you were thinking and the way you were feeling at that time, you didn't try to stop it because.
See, this is very like a very complex thing. Again, you did know that there was these rehearsals. I never went through one. And the last time somebody left, when Debbie Layton left, I wasn't there, but I guess they had a white night. I had a wife and a son who I was concerned about, and no way to get them out. And then you always had the specter of if you left, what happened, if what did happen, what if that happened? Then you'd be responsible for all those people. It was a way of controlling a person. So you had a lot of, continual conflict going on. I would think, well, if I leave, first I wouldn't have left without my son or my wife. To begin with. If I'd ever had the chance, I would have. But then after that, then you think, well, what happens if you're the one that triggers this insanity that did happen?
Did you expect this thing to happen?
No, I didn't. Like I said, if I did, I got my wife and son out of there long ago.
Never thought.
See, you have to understand the condition that your mind is in. It's a fear. It's a fear mechanism that's used to keep people in place.